Birshut Rabbanim, with the permission of the rabbis, I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. But first I want to tell you something that happened a couple of years ago. I was given one time, a couple of years ago, a very nice compliment. I was told that I argue very well. And I think I argue very well. Ask any of my remaining friends. So we all argue. This is not the question. We argue with our friends, parents, with our kids, spouses, colleagues, co-workers. We all argue. The real question is, how do we argue? And the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the chapter of the Fathers, reads the following statement that you may remember it. Which is an argument for the sake of heaven, Ezoi machloket leshem shamayim, which is an argument for the sake of heaven. This is the argument of Hillel and Shammai. Very good. And not for the sake of heaven, a machloket that's not leshem shamayim, not for the benefit of Hashem. This is the argument of Korach ve'adato, and Korach and his entire congregation. So the language of the Mishnah clashes with our expectations. We expect an analogy. We expect on one side Hillel versus Shammai, and on the other side you expect Korach versus Moshe, yes, or Moshe and Aaron, something like that. Instead, the Mishnah says Korach and his entire congregation. And Moshe is not mentioned at all. And I think it's not what you expect, because if it's Hillel versus Shammai, you expect Korach versus Moshe and not Korach and his entire congregation. So the Midrash Shmuel, explains that this actually makes perfect sense, which is an argument for the sake of heaven. This is the argument of Hillel and Shammai, both of whom were motivated entirely for the same reason, Leshem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So a comparison between the two of them is correct and appropriate. When we look at the argument between Korach and Moshe, however, there is no analogy. The motivations of the two parties were not at all the same. And it would be false to claim that Moshe acted not for the sake of heaven, that Moshe acted not Leshem Shamayim. So Moshe had only the purest of the motivations. So the Mishnah simply couldn't say that the argument between Korach and Moshe was not for the sake of heaven, because that would wrongly place Moshe into the same basket with Korach. So Korach was arguing to win. Hillel and Shammai were arguing in order to learn, to improve, to grow. And that is why the Mishnah puts on one side Hillel and Shammai, who both of them have the same idea, try to bring Shamayim, try to do it for the sake of God. And on the other side is Korach and his entire congregation, who were completely and totally motivated not Leshem Shamayim. They were looking for their own interest. And Hillel and Shammai were arguing, as I said, in order to learn, to grow, to improve, and I have a proof for that. So, if you remember, I want to bring back the most famous stories, or one of the most famous stories about Hillel and Shammai. Do you remember, do you think which one I am talking about? Any guess? If you talk all together, it's too loud, so just one guess is enough. Okay, so a student came to Shammai and told him, exactly, teach me the Torah as I am standing on al regel achat, on one foot. So it goes something like this. It's in the Tractate of Shabbat, and it goes like this. So it says as follows. There was another incident involving one Gentile who came before Shammai and said to Shammai, convert me on the condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I am standing on one foot. Excuse me. Shammai pushed him away with the builder's cubit of his hand. He said, get out of here. Then the same person came before Hillel. Hillel converted him and said to him, that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entire Torah. And the rest is interpretation. Go study. So zilgemor, that's, go and study, go continue studying. And I once heard a very nice interpretation that instead of al regel achat is on one foot, what regel means, not just one foot, but one regula, one rule, okay? Just teach me one rule that puts together the whole Torah, okay? So that Shammai didn't want to even talk to the person, get out of here. Hillel said, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. This is the whole Torah. So, let's analyze first the part of Shammai. What does he do? He pushes away this person, saying, I don't want to argue with you. I am not going to engage myself in something I don't agree, and therefore, goodbye. No argument. Now, let's see Hillel's reaction. That which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entire interpretation, the entire Torah, and the rest is interpretation. Go study. What is the most fascinating and most incredible part of this story? Anybody want to tell something, has any idea? I mean, Hillel is asked to be teaching the whole Torah in one phrase. He answers, do not do to someone else what you don't like. What's the most important, or to me, the most fascinating part of this whole story? Any guesses? Yes, David.
About converting an adversary into a potential student.
Hillel is?
Converting an adversary
Yes.
into a potential
Okay, very nice. Yes, that's a very interesting thing. You bring your enemy to, or someone, you do some keruv, include. Anybody else? Yes, Adam.
Well, I see it from both sides. The first one, I find it offensive for someone to come to me and say, teach me your entire history in one sentence.
Okay, that's probably Shammai's reaction. He said, get out.
Just get out.
Yes.
That's offensive.
Okay.
What's interesting about Hillel is that he had an answer.
He had an answer. Very good. But he's been asked to teach the whole Torah. Yes? And what does he answer? What's his answer? Which is hateful to you, do not do to another. Yes? Where in the Torah where's that phrase in the Torah? Where is it mentioned? What's the verse that's it quoting? He's teaching the whole Torah, and that phrase does not appear in the Torah at all. I mean, he could have said, okay, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Or Hillel could have said, Lo tebashel gedi bechalev imo. You shall not boil the kid in its mother's milk. That's the whole Torah. The rest is interpretation. The first commandment, or Bereshit bara Elohim. But Hillel says something that is not in the Torah. That's, to me, it's really fascinating. Hillel is telling him, and he's telling us, I am not going to argue, but you need to think outside the box. I have an answer for you. Now go, do what you have to do. I'm not going to argue with you. I don't want to argue. I give you an answer, but get out again. That was enough. And not only that, I think Hillel is putting all the Torah at the same level. If Hillel said the whole Torah is Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, or Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, he would have been saying that one verse is more important than other verse. Therefore, he's quoting something that is not in the Torah to avoid arguments, even among the verses of the Torah. That's, I think, is fascinating from Hillel's answer. So now back to the comparison. Korach and his people, they wanted to argue. That was their favorite sport, to argue for the sake of the argument, to contend for the sake of the quarrel. Hillel and Shammai didn't want to argue. They picked their own battles. In this case, they knew they didn't have to argue. So how many toxic peoples do we encounter in our lives? People who do not inspire us at all. And think of the arguments that you've had with them. Think, on the other hand, how many people avoid conflict by smiling, by reaching out, by setting example.
So, in which side of the scale would you like to be? With Korach and his friends, or with Hillel and Shammai? I hope you choose the right side. And I imagine you know which side I want to be, but just in case, I'm not going to tell you. Do you know why? Because today, I don't want to argue. Shabbat Shalom.